We're going to help you sharpen your composition skills with Master Photographer Huntington Witherill. He's an award-winning photographer who worked with Ansel Adams. He simplifies and brings clarity to how to compose outstanding images. What are the core points that you always look at in terms of composition?
Well, I think as an overriding sort of mantra for composition, I always like to refer to what Edward Weston, the way he described composition as being the strongest way of seeing. That is a kind of an all-encompassing mantra, if you will. To me, one pays attention to everything in the photographic scene rather than just what attracted you to the scene in the first place. One of the things that happens with composition is that as you're out looking for photographs, you are often attracted to something visually. You want to take a photograph of it, and you may pay close attention to that which has attracted you to the scene, but you might be ignoring or not seeing a lot of other stuff that's going on in the scene at the same time. Finding the strongest way of seeing is really, to my way of thinking, is intellectualizing within myself what it is that's attracting me to the scene in the first place, and then doing my best to include all of that within the photograph itself and eliminate everything else out of the photograph.
Well, in this image, this is really quite stunning. I mean, you have all sorts of compositional tools. You have a leading line or an S curves of the water flowing, and you have framing going on with the rocks. Mm-hmm. What was your vision on this? I mean, it's amazing how you capture that. And tell us what we're looking at.
Thank you. Well, this is on a beach up on the Oregon coast, Bandon Beach, and what really attracted me to this photograph was out in the middle distance, toward the upper right of the photograph, there is a pinnacle of rock,
right,
sort of standing out in the sunshine, and the rest of the scene was sort of muted because of the fog that was coming in. And I immediately noticed that this sort of little river of tidal backwash produced a line that sort of leads the viewer from the lower left of the photograph right up to that pinnacle. And so the idea was, in this case, that I wanted to show that rock. I wanted to highlight that rock out in the middle distance there, or the right-hand distance.
Yeah.
And then to cause the viewer to actually run their eye from the lower left corner right up to that rock.
Huntington, I love that quote from Weston, and I know he really didn't talk a lot about composition from what I remember.
Yeah.
But that was a key point.
Well, I'll tell you, I would like to encourage your viewers, of course, to go out to my website. I have an article out there that I recently wrote. This is now maybe a year or so ago, called The Strongest Way of Seeing.
Right.
And an article about composition. And when I first set out to compose that article, I did a little research into what Edward Weston actually had to say about composition. And there are quite a few quotes that pertain to composition that Weston that were attributed to Weston. One of the things about composition is that it's really not a skill that can be taught in a rote fashion. In other words, you can't go by a prescribed list of instructions on do this, do the other, and you will end up with a good composition. It unfortunately is a skill that is largely intuitive. And so it really cannot, unlike development when film, for example, the idea that when you develop film, you get your chemistry to a certain temperature and you use a certain amount of time for your development and you will get the result you're after. That's not necessarily true in composition. There are all sorts of rules for composition that work sometimes, but they don't work all of the time. What this article on my website does is it goes into a couple of strategies for improving your composition that are concrete strategies that one can actually employ. And as an example of one very simple thing you can do is when I'm out looking for composition, I often will squint at the scene. What that does is that takes all the detail away from the scene, and it causes everything to kind of revert to being blobs of shape and form, and helps me to organize those blocks of shape and form within the frame without paying too much attention to the actual details in the scene. And what this does is then causes my compositions hopefully to be a little more structurally sound, as it were. I pay attention to visual balance within each scene that I photograph. There's no set way to describe this, but when you look at a photograph, your eye does not take in the whole photograph at the same time. One of the things I often suggest to my students is to take their hand and put it out at arm's length as though you are directing somebody to stop in front of you. And then with one eye closed, focus on your thumbnail. And what you'll notice is that all your other fingers are out of focus. And what that tells you is that the eye is capable of seeing only a very small degree of in focus stuff at any one time. What your eye does is it scans all over a scene, and your mind picks up what it is you're seeing, it remembers it, and then it puts it all together. Your brain puts all the information together as a finished image. So when you're looking at a scene, you don't see it all at one time. Your eye travels through the scene, depending upon what it's attracted to. The same thing happens in a finished photograph. So it's important, I think, when you're out there looking for a composition, to concentrate on the way your eye travels in the scene. With this photograph, this is a good example where, to my eye, what happens is my eye goes into the lower left of this photograph. It follows the line of that shadow up to that rock on the right, and then is pulled over to the rock on the left, and then it goes into the background. And so it's basically taking your eye on a little journey. And there is a thing that I call orchestrating the way your eye travels through a photograph. That's what composition is to me, is to arrange the scene in such a way that you in a sense, control the way the viewer actually views the image. In what order do they see things? In other words, do they see this first? Do they see that second? Oftentimes when composition doesn't work, it's because there is something along the way that is there which distracts the eye from viewing what you really want the viewer to see. And oftentimes that's very bright objects over on the side of the image, or something that's leading off in a corner somewhere that attracts your eye to view that, and maybe that's not something you want the viewer to actually see. So I guess to sum up, it is that composition is the act of determining what it is you want the viewer to see, zeroing in on that and eliminating everything else out of the photograph.
Those are some really fantastic points from Huntington Witherill. Be sure to put them into use right away, and grab his article, The Strongest Way of Seeing. It's in the description. Please subscribe and enable the bell so you don't miss any of our new shows. Like the video and please share it and leave your comments. I love hearing from you. And remember to get out and capture your own images of life.